Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Clayco Group's webinar series. We are in our March edition, and the topic for today is trade solutions in Asia in terms of developing sales structures. About 10 years ago, the focus of most companies' market entry into the Asia-Pacific region was associated with China, but in the last 12 to 18 months, the trend that we have seen is that people are looking at the Asia-Pacific region and how they can start their business, how they can develop it, and not just looking at China. Before we begin today's presentation, I just want to make sure that everybody could hear me. And if you could raise your hands in the control panel, then it will allow me to see that you can hear me. For your information, the presentation will be distributed to the participants at the end of this webinar, together with the recording. If you do have questions, please do place them in the Q&A section of your panel. We might not have time at the end of today to go through all of the questions, but please do stay online and I will try to answer you directly through the questions panel. If you do exit or have to leave immediately after the webinar, then I will answer your questions by email at a later date. For those of you that are new to Clayco Group's webinar series, I would just like to provide you a little bit of background. Clayco Group is an international accounting and management consulting firm that was started in Hong Kong in 1979. Since then, we've grown to having 10 operational offices in Asia, China being included, as well as in Singapore. We have over 120 professionals working throughout the 10 offices, and we help foreign companies to enter the Asia-Pacific market, working on all administrative matters that need to occur. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler. I'm a director with Clayco Group. I've been with the firm for over 11 years now, when I first started the Shanghai office at the end of 2003. I've been helping foreign companies entering the Chinese market since then, as well as looking at other markets in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm also co-author of our monthly magazine, ChinaInvest.biz, which if you're interested in subscribing to, can be easily done through our website by just inserting your email address. So to start off today's webinar, the focus I want to play is really on market entry activities, as well as expansion activities within Asia. As I was mentioning in my introduction, a lot of people were originally looking at China as a focus, and in these examples I'll be using China as an example, but of course you can relate it to Vietnam, Thailand, and other operational jurisdictions in the Asia-Pacific region. So to start off, when you're planning your Asian investment and you're looking to develop your sales structures, you'll have a series of questions that will pop up in your mind when you're trying to design your business plan. And it will start from the who's, the what's, the where's, the why's, and the when. So first of all, when you are looking to set up your business, let's say in China or any other jurisdiction in Asia, how are you going to start it off? Who are you going to employ? Who's going to be responsible for this expansion and this development in this new emerging region? Are you going to start off utilizing a distributor or an agent? Are you going to have a division that's dedicated for that expansion in the Asia-Pacific region? Will you be seconding expatriates to start and develop and take care of that business? Or will you more go in the direction of localizing your business? These are all questions that need to be considered, especially in the short and in the long-term phase. What we've seen as a trend and is working fabulously in China is that people are starting to mix cultures. They're looking to foster a philosophy within the company that is of a mixed culture, mixed philosophy, thinking a little bit more out of the box, and having dual general managers or dual management systems where you will have a Westerner as well as an Eastern person coming together and developing and managing the business. The next question is, what are you actually going to be doing in that jurisdiction. For example, in China, what is your business strategy? Now, if you're looking towards developing your sales structures, you might be thinking in terms of doing wholesale, in terms of retail, e-commerce. These are all aspects that you will need to consider. In addition to all of this, you have to consider, particularly when you're looking to develop sales structures, whether you need to register your IP, whether your trademark is that valuable and your brand is that valuable and needs to be protected. This is actually one of the first steps that you need to do. If Asia Pacific is the new up-and-coming territory for you, then don't just do it in one location, but really spread your wings and do it in all the jurisdictions that you're planning on going in from day one. That should really be one of the first objectives that you focus on. The next is, where is my business in Asia, or specifically in the larger jurisdictions like China? Where is it going to be in the short and in the long term? Now, you have to look at each jurisdiction on an individual basis, but you should also look at the region itself and look at what your strategy is. Now, for many people that focused initially 10 years ago on China, they generally started off their businesses in the Tier 1 cities. If you look at all the very high luxury brands like the Louis Vuittons, the Pradas, they all started in Shanghai, Beijing with their retail stores and their retail concepts. Now they're looking to expand, obviously, into the Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 cities through other sales channels like e-commerce, for example. Some of them are even looking to expand into other Asian regions, like in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, etc. The next is, why are you actually going to Asia or a specific jurisdiction like China? Have you done your market research study? Have you really looked and investigated the market to see whether your product is of value and whether it can actually be sold? What are your business plans, your goals, your strategies for the market penetration? There are a lot of items that need to be considered that I'll go into at a later stage in the presentation that you really need to put inside your business plan. And last but not least, you have to consider, when are you planning on doing your entry? And the reason why we have added this here is because in all Asian jurisdictions, the laws and regulations are still quite immature. And there are changes that are occurring on a daily basis which will affect your business plan in the long term, even possibly in the short term. As such, if you've created your business plan today, but you're looking to only execute that business plan in 6 months, you really do need to consider updating it and making sure that it is current. Then I've also listed here a checklist of what you need to consider when starting off your Asian operation. And the first aspect is establishing the right culture from day one. When I've met a lot of foreign investors from many jurisdictions all over Europe, the US, etc. Their goal, especially when they're small, is we're going to do exactly what we're doing in our home jurisdiction and implement that in Asia. That's just the wrong concept to develop. You're never going to bring the US into the Asian market. You have to be able to adapt yourself and adapt your culture, your thought process, your marketing initiatives, all of that into the right culture from day one, and be able to be flexible and adaptable. The second, like I had mentioned earlier, is registering your trademarks, your intellectual property. This really should be one of your main priorities in terms of entering the market, particularly if you're looking to develop your sales structures and develop and market your brand that you've been working on for years to make renowned. The third is licenses. Do you need any type of licenses to operate locally in that jurisdiction? Now in China, things are extremely complicated. There are a whole series of licenses which are needed. In Hong Kong and Singapore, this is less so. If you're looking at more of the developing countries within the Asia-Pacific region, you can assume that there will be a whole series of licenses that are required. In the more developed countries like Korea, Japan, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, maybe less likely. Vet your suppliers, vet your customers, vet your partners, vet your service providers, especially when you're going into Asia. The fact that you're going to have to deal with time zone differentials, distances, etc. Make sure you're really working with the people you want to work. You've done your due diligence, you've done your background checks, and you feel confident in collaborating with them on a long-term basis. It's also highly recommended to do regular health checks and internal audits to make sure that your original due diligence that you had done continues to occur over the years and that nobody is cheating you, basically. So to keep that confidence level, it is recommended to do regular health checks, maybe once a year, as well as internal audits, and make sure that everything is in compliance and your business is developing appropriately. One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen is people really do start to slack when they rely a lot on their partners. And obviously with time zone differences and language barriers, this all doesn't help. You really should think about appointing the right directors, the right senior management personnel to take care of your business. Think about this carefully prior to establishing your structures, and make sure that the right people are responsible for the business development. Just like in your home jurisdiction, you really should assess having internal controls, even if you are just having a one-man show operation in Asia. You should still try to implement these internal controls so that as you grow and as you expand and as you hire more employees, these internal control systems get utilized. It's better to do that from day one, and then you can actively monitor these control systems and make sure that the internal processes and workflows are working accordingly. Developing a fraud response plan, I find that this is essential in Asia because there is still quite a lot of corruption, there's still a lot of under-table business, and with the new bribery acts that are coming in place or have been in place for a while in the US and in the UK, fraud and corruption are definitely big issues. One of the key things that I've learned locally in the market is that many of the subordinates in a company will not go or will be too shy to stab their managers in the back because they may lose a part of their face and their reputation. So one of the recommendations that I can make is sitting with individual staff once a quarter, maybe once every half year, to see how they feel within the company. This is also a great human resource retention plan. So it can be both a fraud response plan, but also a human resource retention plan where you really find out the ins and outs of your company. And people feel much more confident doing that on a one-to-one basis versus doing that in a group. And last but not least, obtain advice. You will encounter a lot of individuals that try to instill corruption tactics or under-table tactics to develop your business. If something doesn't make common sense to you, or you would never implement that workflow in your own home jurisdiction, ask people for advice. There are a whole series of foreign consulting firms, law firms, accounting firms, human resource firms locally that are established that are there to actually guide you and provide you with the correct advice. Utilize that before making mistakes, because it could turn out that you're spending much more money on fixing mistakes than actually doing things right from day one. So I'm going to first take a look at case studies involving developing trade solutions in Asia. And the first option, or the first case study, is obviously selling without any type of representation locally in Asia. Obviously this method has low risk, low commitment, and obviously the return on investment will be minimal because you're doing everything from your home jurisdiction. Obviously it also eliminates any type of corruption and fraud, but really if you want to gain momentum in the market, then naturally you're going to have to be there. So the second option is utilizing a distributor. And you may want to use a distributor in various countries throughout Asia, or you may want to centralize it from one region where you find a distributor who says or explains that they have the expertise in working with various countries. My philosophy really is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Try to find as many distributors as you can. Utilize them to learn the business, learn the market, and over time see whether you can minimize the amount of distributors and eventually have maybe just 2 or 3 that cater to your Asian market. Obviously, there's always disadvantages utilizing distributors. In the end of the day, they know who the end clients are and they're controlling the end price. So whether this is an advantage for you, maybe in the short term it is, but in the long term where you really want to develop your business, you may want to do it by yourself. The next option is using sales agents with office and office solutions. This is a service that Clayco Group, for example, provides, whereby we can employ sales agents that are legally employed in the jurisdictions that we operate in. They will work full-time on behalf of the client overseas. Their background obviously should be that they're familiar with the products of the client. They work in the office, so obviously the advantage is minimal investment cost for the client who's looking to set up these operations. And it is a fantastic testing ground for many companies to see whether they can manage staff without having really the full liability of employing them and setting up an entity to employ them, and researching the market. For many clients that we offer this service, they do this for a minimal amount of period, let's say 1 to 2 years, where they really consider it to be a market research development, where they can then say after 1 or 2 years, yes, we're ready to go ahead into the market, establish a company, and we're going to go full force because really the sales amounts and commissions have gone up. Or they might say the market doesn't fit the product, and as a consequence, they need to step back from the market and focus on other regions. Now, one of the aspects that I mentioned earlier inside the checklist for developing your Asian operations was looking at licenses and looking at import regulations. I've seen a lot of foreign SMEs make the mistakes of not doing this type of research, and this is vital. China, as I had mentioned, is one of the jurisdictions in Asia which has extensive licensing requirements. Just to give you an example, if you're looking to develop e-commerce in the market, you do need to have what's called an Internet Content Providing License, and there are requirements and criteria to fulfill and obtain that license. If you're selling electro-technology products or housewares that have an electronic component, you need to make sure you get the 3C certification and licensing, which can take up to 1 year to 2 years to obtain, and so on. So you have to make sure you know exactly what type of licensing you require. Now, as an example and as a comparison, I wanted to provide here an idea of how Hong Kong and Singapore work, and to show how more mature of a market they are in that they have minimal licensing requirements, and even better than that, they have duty-free exemptions on most products. Where you do need licenses are food and beverage items, pharmaceutical, chemical items, etc. But on standard products, no licenses are actually required. The next aspect to also focus on and do your research on is naturally product liability and consumer protectionism laws, especially if you're looking to sell products locally in the markets. You have to make sure that you research each jurisdiction, because each jurisdiction will have its own laws and regulations associated with this. You should really understand what are you as a supplier, what are your liabilities. If you're utilizing distributors, what are their liabilities? Is there any possibility of joint liability actions? Is there a limitation of action if you are selling products? What types of obligations exist? Is there in the end certain criminal liabilities? You may have all heard of the milk powder scandals in China, where people were sent to jail and even executed. So again, it's very important to know what could happen if something goes wrong. You have to look at the scope of damage compensation. Is there insurance that can be purchased and can protect you? And in the end, you just really have to understand the legal framework in each of the jurisdictions in Asia. Look at your sales contracts to see whether they can be adapted to the local regulations, and again, just check your research. So looking at more intense or more commitment and risk-oriented structures that can be developed, the next is utilizing Hong Kong or Singapore as a re-invoicing center. Now, I've chosen Hong Kong and Singapore here because, quite honestly, in the Asia-Pacific region, Hong Kong and Singapore are the two jurisdictions whereby it is extremely easy to set up entities. It follows common law practice, which is very similar to British law, so it's quite advanced. In addition to that, what I've noticed is that people have a level of confidence with the transparency that exists in both Hong Kong and Singapore compared to other regions in the Asian Pacific market. In addition to that, we have seen that Hong Kong is generally utilized for market entry into China, but also as a regional hub for Korea, Japan, Taiwan. And Singapore is more often used to enter the ASEAN region, so countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore then becomes the regional hub in these locations. I think one of the key points to mention with developing these structures is that Hong Kong and Singapore, as mentioned earlier, are duty-free locations, which means that you can import products, warehouse them, and pay no duty on it. And things can then be sold from there on consignment basis to the various jurisdictions in the Asian Pacific region. So this is something also to keep in mind. One of the biggest advantages that Hong Kong has to offer, particularly when doing business with China, is the fact that you can do payments or receive payments in renminbi. Singapore is also starting to develop the renminbi offshore center concept, and again, that's one of the advantages of centralizing that as a location. The next option is going directly into the jurisdiction that you want to operate in, and I've given here an example of going directly into China. You could, of course, go directly into Korea, go directly into Japan, or go directly into Vietnam or Thailand. But again, the whole system is rather complicated because you do have to do research on the tax laws, the legal law, the legal company laws, licensing, customs issues, etc. One of the biggest problems with China is that obviously when goods enter the market and you want to warehouse it, you do have to pay customs duty. Of course, one of the advantages compared to Hong Kong and Singapore is that warehousing costs in China is lower, but you do have to pay customs duty on the products. Obviously, if you're looking to just enter the China market, then this might be an advantage for you. But this is where it's key to also think, what is your long-term strategy? Where are you planning on expanding to, if ever? If China is not your only destination, then again, you may want to consider having a holding structure first. And it leads me on to the next slide, which is actually one of the most complex structures, but it gives you an idea of how businesses eventually develop in the Asian region, whereby you make Hong Kong or Singapore your regional headquarters, and from there you set up subsidiaries, for example in China or in Vietnam or in Thailand, where you cater to the local market. But originally your main financial hub or your main warehousing hub would be in Hong Kong or in Singapore. So again, this is really the most extensive plan, and it's really to consider your long-term strategy, whereas the previous slides are more in relation to short-term plans and short-term strategies. What are the benefits for you and your customer by establishing a local presence in Asia? Well, obviously, if you have an Asian presence, then your interests are directly on the ground and your customers can see that you're there. It offers a certain level of prestige and greater face to your Asian customers. It shows greater commitment to the market and to your customers. In many of the developed countries in Asia, you can be provided with bank credits. It obviously takes time now. It's not automatic, but it is a possibility to achieve that. In Hong Kong and Singapore, you do have low tax rates. China has one of the highest tax rates in all of Asia Pacific region at 25%. But in general, one of the advantages of Asia Pacific region is that it does have low taxes in order to set up your operations. You can market yourself internationally as being a supplier or buyer to new suppliers or new customers globally. There's always going to be a level of confidentiality that can be provided in Asia. You just have to find the right structure to develop that. Obviously, by having a local presence and hiring local staff means that communication and language barriers can be eliminated. You'll always be in similar time zones so that you can answer clients within a 24-hour period rather than waiting longer. And obviously, if you develop your warehousing locally, then delivery times will be shortened. And again, local currency can be eliminated. For example, if you open a bank account with HSBC in Hong Kong for an entity in Hong Kong, then you automatically get 10 currencies on your basic account. In China, you can also have more than one currency. You can have the US dollar, euro, as well as the RMB naturally. So operating in local currency is a great advantage to many customers. Trade solutions in Asia, the next step is looking at the retail and e-commerce. And looking at this is really analyzing where are your customers in Asia. I was trying to find a map that could encompass most of the Asia-Pacific region. I was able to get a little bit of Australia because Australia is considered part of the Asia-Pacific region as well as New Zealand. So it's a matter of looking at this map and saying, where are my customers going to be in the short term and where are they going to be in the long term? Where am I going to start off my business and where am I going to develop my business? One of the things that I've learned in the last year, especially with the boom of the e-commerce sector in China, is that you can't forget certain locations. Now, China is a huge country. It's very difficult to get reliable market research data, but here is an interesting diagram that was provided by the McKinsey Global Institute, where they were analyzing, or they realized that there are 440 emerging cities in the Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4 areas of China. And according to McKinsey, 47% of the global growth will be generated just by these 440 cities by 2025. Simultaneously to McKinsey, the Boston Consulting Group, they also did a study on these emerging market cities in China, and they said that actually the wealth accumulation and consumption in those cities would overtake Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen in the very near future, so in around 3 to 5 years' time. And they're expecting tremendous growth from these regions. So, you know, when you're looking at a market, don't just focus on the main cities. Really do your research and try and do as much digging as possible to look at also these emerging cities that are popping up and see whether it might be more interesting for your product line to go directly there versus starting off in the mature cities of these certain countries. How to market to Asia's masses? Well, obviously you can't overlook the fact that even low-income consumers have needs they want help meeting. Now, on average in Asia, the earning income is around $2,000 a year, which to many of you may sound like peanuts. But you also have to realize that the standard of living in many of these countries is still minimal. Paying for housing, schooling, etc., it's not much. And as a consequence, they do have leftover capital to buy consumer products and to have a nice life and to travel globally and to learn what the market has to offer. So yes, in every market you do have to be price conscious, but you also have to realize that there are extensive consumers available and who want your product and have learned about your brand to be able to afford what they want. Some tips for success in terms of entering the Asian market, especially in terms of marketing, is listen to what the local market needs are. Understand what the lifestyle is like. When you go to a city in China or in Vietnam or Japan or Australia or the Philippines, travel around these cities, visit homes, go to markets, take local modes of transportation so that you can see how people are living, what people's needs are, whether they're carrying the next iPhone, whether they want to have the next iPhone. Listen to really their motivations and understand what do they want. You've got to tailor-make every experience. Obviously, the Asia-Pacific region is huge. It's unique. It's a patchwork quilt of a variety of religions, cultures, etc. And you have to be able to understand and tailor-make your product as well as your marketing and branding to fit into that market. And don't forget to invest in the future. Don't just take an existing product and water it down because you assume that being in an emerging market, they're going to be okay with just a more simplified product, even though the brand is higher end. If you look in the Chinese market, what's actually very interesting to me is that if you look in the mobile sector, the iPhone has only 14%, or Apple has only 14% of the mobile market in China because most Chinese like the Samsung products. They like the Galaxy products, and they get much more out of the product in terms of applications. And Samsung has made huge efforts in terms of providing the applications in Chinese, both in traditional language and simplified language. And they've invested in that in order to gain momentum in that market. So make sure you tailor-make your products to fit the local markets. The challenges that I've seen for people that are looking to come into the market in terms of retail and in terms of e-commerce is obviously the first is really language and marketing. You really do have to develop your brand names, and your marketing has to be adapted to the local tools that you have to use. You've got to obviously market your product in the local languages and not in the language from your home jurisdiction. That's just the basics. Obviously, look at the licenses that are required for certain products. Make sure you can obtain them. And again, price sensitivity is always going to be a factor. But, you know, do your benchmarking. Look at what competitors are available in those local jurisdictions and see how your product compares to them and how you can then price your products. Consider intellectual property. Make sure you protect your trademarks and your patents. Otherwise, you really could ruin your business. Look at customer service. What level are you going to provide? Do you need to develop a call center aspect in those local jurisdictions to develop your business? Consider product liability, consumer protectionism, and last but not least, where you may be able to outsource a lot of functions in your home jurisdictions, you do have to realize that in Asia it's still very labor intensive. You're going to have a team on the ground in order to be really productive and be successful in the market, to handle both the marketing, the supply chain, the customer service, as well as the IT aspects. So at the end of this presentation, I just want to go through the key considerations that you need to make when coming into the Asian market. Certain things that you should not forget when you're developing your trading structures, when you're developing your business locally. And the first is really, don't have a lack of control and communication with your regional offices, with your local offices. Make sure you're up to date with everything that's going on, especially during your startup phase. Take control of that operation and make sure that you're familiar with what is going on. Communicate with those offices. Don't let those offices feel like they're so far away from the headquarters. Make them feel like they're part of it. Bring people over, train them, make them understand your philosophies. This leads me on to turning a blind eye. Make sure you're aware about all the legal compliance issues, tax compliance issues, all the administrative functions that need to occur. Don't rely just on local staff to do that for you, again, especially in the early stages of developing your business. Ethical situations are always arising. They're becoming big issues, particularly with bribery acts appearing and corruption still being in the news. In China, for example, I always hear the comment, oh, well, that's China, we can do it. That's not the way you should be doing your business. You should have a level of common sense. Try not to do things under the table, but be flexible and open with the idea that there's always going to be a way to get around certain obstacles, but in a legal manner. And be aware of these situations. Another big mistake that I've seen is companies being very cost conscious, and rather than seconding staff, they hire both inexperienced foreign and local staff to develop their business, which in my opinion just means you're hiring individuals that need to be trained thoroughly and that are never trained because there's just not enough time. And as a consequence to that, your business doesn't develop at the speed that you would like it to develop. Look at the cultural differences. Obviously, there are differences between the East and the West. Foreigners do tend to get cultural shocks when doing business in Asia, obviously because it's extremely different from the outside world. So as I mentioned earlier, try and develop the right culture from day one. And one of the key points that has helped a lot of companies is having a mixed culture in that environment where one is teaching the other about how to do things. Know your suppliers and know your customers. If your suppliers or customers are subcontracting or your distributors are going to end customers, be aware of who the subcontractors are, be aware of who the end clients are. Don't be naive. Make sure you're fully up to date and up to speed about what is happening with the local operations. It's extremely important to know this. Be aware of the extent of government interaction. Obviously, there are a lot of emerging market countries in Asia that have preferential policies for foreign investment. This obviously also still exists in China, although less so. My biggest philosophy is no matter what jurisdiction you go into, if you're getting a preferential policy, make sure the government puts it in writing, puts their stamp on the document, as well as their signature. Without that document, you can't prove anything to any government office about what has been promised to you. And obviously, you're planning your business plan and you're planning your strategy or your expansion based on those policies and those promises that are being provided. But it's very common in Asia that governments have extremely high turnover of staff. So if one government officer promises you something, but he then leaves after a year, it could very well be that the next person is not aware at all of any of the promises that have been made to you. And last but not least, if there are abnormal or unexpected methods of payment, ask advice. Ask whether that's normal. Ask whether that can actually be done in that jurisdiction. Do that prior to actually going through with those methods. Again, never rush your business, never rush your strategy planning or your business development. Make sure you really check with several people to see whether certain things are possible. And in conclusion, to the topic of developing trade solutions for your sales structures in Asia, I just want to conclude with a few do's and don'ts. The first is make sure you understand your market very well. Asia, as I mentioned, it's not one market. It has wide variations from climates to local cultures. You will even find that in some countries there are variations by itself, for example in China. You've got to understand the market dynamics in those jurisdictions and the underlying regulations and policies. You have to make sure also you establish a suitable business model. Key operation tasks should be well delegated and monitored to avoid issues like slow product launches, inconsistent service delivery, poor control systems, etc. What you shouldn't do in these markets is obviously overprice your products because you're just not going to get your name into the market. We all know that foreign brands generally have a higher market value, but you also have to teach the local markets about your brand, to make them aware of your brand. A lot of people may never have heard of them. So make sure you really are careful with the pricing. And don't rush into any type of expansion. Do things slowly, do things accurately, do things punctually. Sales and store counts are not the key issue in terms of your expansion. It's really how you deliver that service. And overexpansion really may bring challenges in human resource, in merchandising, in supply, etc. So make sure you really are aware of taking your time, researching the markets, and expanding as you are confident to expand. So I hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. If you are interested in joining our future webinars, then again you can subscribe on our homepage. In addition, we have an events section which highlights all of our upcoming webinars. The April webinar series will be also on trade solutions in Asia, but looking from a sourcing perspective and how things are actually moving from China to other sourcing locations in the Asia-Pacific region. So if you do have any questions, again, please place them in the questions panel. I will be around for around 5 to 10 minutes. For those of you that wrote questions, I will be answering you personally and directly. And I hope to see all of you again very soon. Thank you for joining us and have a very good evening. Thank you.